Hi guys, I hope you're doing okay and that you're not too stressed out. I'm just experimenting with this particular format just to see if it works or not. If it doesn't, we can use Zoom instead, or you can just continue to email me work. Remember, you're supposed to be focusing on Hamlet and Paper 1 in terms of revision and also emailing essays and so on. So, very few of those have arrived so far. So, get working on that. I have posted handouts on the last two poets that we're going to do. So that's Adrian Rich, the American poet, and Ilan Ní Chuilleanán, who's the Irish poet. Okay, so I'll be posting either a video or audio on those two, so poem by poem. So we're going to kind of simplify it as much as possible. And we'll do 4 poems by Rich and 4 poems then by Ní Chuilleanán. Okay, so just to take up from where we left off then a couple of weeks ago, we have completed 2 poems by Emily Dickinson. So Hope is a Thing with Feathers and I Taste a Liquor Never Brewed. And we had just looked at the first couple of verses then of A Narrow Fellow in the Grass. Okay, so make sure that you read that particular poem a couple of times, have a look at the notes. And then obviously, of course, you can pause this and sort of divide it up, can divvy it up whatever way you want to. Okay, so remember once more, we're looking at Emily Dickinson focusing on nature. Here she's trying to look at, we say, the 2 different sides of nature. And she's emphasizing that nature truly can never be fully understood. Okay, we can appreciate nature, we can admire nature, but do we truly understand nature? Do we truly understand, we'd say, how wild and unpredictable and how dangerous and threatening and intimidating nature can be? So she uses a very kind of simple conversational style at the very, very beginning, and she's emphasizing that she's observing nature, as she often does, of course, in her poetry. Okay, so at the very beginning then, she says, "A narrow fellow in the grass occasionally rides. You may have met him, did you not? His notice sudden is." So this is the idea, of course, that she's very familiar with certain aspects of nature. But later on in the poem, then, of course, she will emphasize the dark side of nature. So it's not necessarily just straightforward, and she's not kind of emphasizing the harmony between nature and mankind or nature and humankind here. So when she says a narrow fellow in the grass, obviously we have a very strong visual, the narrow body, of course, the slim or slender body of the snake. The habitat, obviously, of course, the grass itself. We're kind of reminded then, there's a little hint, of course, of that idiom, a snake in the grass. So it's kind of a hint of betrayal or threat or danger, perhaps, or even evil. Remember, we said, of course, that it's associated with a biblical image, perhaps, in the Garden of Eden as well. But the word fellow would suggest something very friendly or very affable, or the idea, of course, of a polite and courteous gentleman, if we think back, of course, to the 1800s. And occasionary rides, of course, would suggest this particular notion that you spot the snake now and again. Okay, so he wouldn't be sort of a frequent visitor, perhaps, we say, to the garden. Remember, of course, she was a keen gardener and a keen observer of nature. So her long walks and so on, of course, she would be very familiar with certain sights and certain sounds and so on. But it's kind of emphasizing the idea that she would spot this creature now and again. So it's the notion, of course, that the snake is quite mysterious and quite elusive, even though a snake is quite ordinary outside of Ireland, obviously. Okay, we notice, of course, that she's using, as we've mentioned before, anthropomorphism. So she's attributing human qualities to this particular creature or animal as such. Okay, that's obviously very important, anthropomorphism. So the idea of associating then, of course, human behavior or human traits then with an animal. Okay, we also, of course, have the idea then, of course, that